Hello, everybody. I'm John Self, and welcome to Office Hours. We'll begin at 4 p.m. Today, we're going to be talking about how to avoid shooting yourself in the foot in a job search. Hi, everybody. I'm John Self. Welcome to Office Hours. It's the weekly coaching session, group coaching session for your career community members and others that might want to join us. I've been coaching people in their job search and career management strategies for 7, 8 years. I was 27 years. I spent as an executive recruiter globally, working across the United States and in 6 countries on 4 continents. We try to take time during this session to share some things that we believe might help you do a better job with your search. We all come into the search issue, and we want to be sure that we are absolutely we think we're really prepared. We've done this before, and it's really hard for us to think that we're not up to prime time. That things can't have changed so dramatically that we can't compete. Unfortunately, they have changed dramatically. And in a tight labor market, you cannot afford to be unaware of these changes. You cannot afford to not be aware of how you're going to be able to, how you have to adapt to be successful. Getting to the interview table is hard. Getting just to the first interview is really hard. And so when you get through the threshold of automated scanning reviews and automated sourcing and all those things, you're actually talking to a human being. You don't want to waste the opportunity. And so today we're going to give you some tips on how you can avoid that problem. So let's get started. This is, by the way, about a 30-minute presentation today, and so I hope you'll stay with us. Fear defeats more people than any one thing in the world. Ralph Waldo Emerson said that. And when we say fear defeats more people, sometimes fear is the reluctance to admit that we don't understand what's happening. We don't understand how things have changed. And that's human nature. When I was a recruiter, I felt so confident about what I was doing, and I think I did it pretty well. But as I grew in my career and toward the end of my career, I began to sense a difference in what the clients wanted, what they expected. And so, you get to a point in your career, you say, okay, it's time to step aside and let the younger generation step in place and take over. And you can, but if you're younger, you got to change. You can't sit there and say, well, I'm going to retire early. Retiring early at 40 is not a good option, believe me. Being forced to retire, reluctant retirement at age 50 or 55 or 60 is really uncomfortable for a lot of people. And so what I'm saying today is, if you want to extend your career, if you want to be relevant and be viable in your career, you have to be willing to change. And I think that the key thing is an anonymous quote that I found that I think is so relevant, is that when the fear of staying the same really outweighs the fear of change, the reluctance to change, that's when we have to change. And that's usually when we do change. So as we go through today, if you have questions, please understand that you're not alone. If you're struggling to try to adapt to these new rules, you are not alone. There are so many people out there. If you are struggling because you're just not comfortable with what's happening, it's, when you say it's a fear of change, but it's not a negative. Unless you just stay where you are. If you don't change, that becomes a negative. And we help people change all the time. And for people who get into this and understand the new rules and how you have to uh, manage your career today, a lot of them find that it is very, very rewarding, and even have said that it's brought new meaning to a lot of things they do in their life. So we encourage you, if you have questions, you can reach us at johngself.com, or you can go to our website, go to the bottom of the page, and it says Talk to John. How clever. And I'll be happy to spend time with you in talking about your career and some things you must do to be able to be more successful. The job market's pretty bad in the management and executive level, and it's not going to get any better anytime soon. So without dwelling too much on that issue, let's begin and talk about what we want to accomplish today. So the focus today is what just happened. Second, this sounds like a TV show riddle. Market uncertainty in your job search, and boy, there has been a lot of uncertainty the last 2 weeks. And then third, are you ready to compete? Are you tired of not being selected? Are you tired of getting to the end stage and losing out to somebody else who has done a better job than you? So let's talk about what just happened. I think that there's a lot we could say this week. Um, what is clouding a lot of the job picture now, and this extends not just financial services, but this extends to Main Street, to healthcare, across the scope and span of American business. And that is, there is so much uncertainty. We had a significant event this past week on Tuesday night around midnight. The 30-year Treasury bond broke through 5% on yield, which means that it's going to cost America a lot more money to finance their debt. And America is constantly refinancing with 2-year bonds, 5-year bonds, 10-year bonds, 30-year bonds. And it's an ongoing process, a weekly auction of these bonds. And what was happening, what drove the interest rate up, was that a lot of foreign governments were selling U.S. bonds. Now, U.S. bonds are typically a safety place, a place of safety. When the market's in turmoil, people take their investments out of the equities market and put them in things like gold and cash. They may put it in cash, like Warren Buffett did. And a lot of times they'll invest in Treasury bonds. For the 30-year yields to go up meant that a lot of people were selling the bonds. And that also means that that's a sign that people were losing confidence in America as a safe haven, and America is the reserve currency, and that America would fulfill its commitments. Now, sometimes those fears are irrational, but at midnight, the alarm bells went off, and the futures on the Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped like a freaking rock. And so when everybody woke up on Wednesday morning, the market was underwater so far you thought you'd have to get a submarine to find it. And what does that do? And here's the point: it permeates business. It affects how CEOs look at things, whether you're a hospital CEO in San Diego or running a chain of retail stores in New York City, or managing a financial services company or a manufacturing company in Georgia. It impacts everyone. No one wants to spend the money to make an investment going forward if they don't know what the rules are going to be. And so the whole issue of the tariffs and the trade imbalance has really roiled the market. And Tuesday at midnight, that was a special kind of panic. I remember being up, and I remember seeing people posting online about, my God, what's going on? And it really sent a chill up my back. I'm not an expert in the markets. I'm not an expert in treasury bonds. I have a lot of people who share information with me. I talk to people all over the country. And this was a kind of a spooky event, because that could spell a problem for businesses across America in terms of access to capital through, and with the tighter, it could have really cramped up liquidity. And when you have liquidity, as we remember in 2008, 2009, even the biggest companies have trouble surviving. GE was struggling to get the capital was so tight. GE during 2008 was struggling to find credit lines just to manage their cash flow, daily cash flow. And when the company back then in the 80s, GE was really powerful and very successful. When they couldn't get a credit line to finance receivables, that tells you it's pretty bad. It doesn't take a lot for it to pass 5% and for everything just to seize up. And so it was a really moment of concern. The next day, the market, the Treasury Secretary, who understood what the implications were, went before the president and made a very strong case that he needed to hit the brake pedal a little bit and back off his reciprocal tariffs to avoid a really serious marketplace problem. Now, they pitched it, as politicians all do, Republicans and Democrats, that this was our strategy all along, and we were waiting for something, that we knew this might happen, and we were ready, and we've already got 70 or 75 people lining up to make deals with us. 2 days prior, they had said there would be no deals. So, that all that uncertainty, all that does is make executives reluctant to act on their CapEx spending, and makes executives reluctant to launch new hiring initiatives to prepare for a business increase. And matter of fact, I think earlier in the week, Goldman Sachs increased their recession probability to about 60%. Now it's back off again, but we're not out of the woods yet. I mean, the reciprocal tariffs have been repealed, but what's left in place, and with Canada and Mexico, is still the 25% on automobiles, number one. And number two, the 10% tariffs on all countries that we were dealing with, that part of the tariff regimen remains in effect. So we backed off reciprocals, but there is still so much uncertainty in the business community that it is not doing well. In fact, and again, the equities market is not necessarily, the equities market reflects everybody's sort of attitude and how they feel, but it's the bond market. The bond market is what you have to watch. And when interest yields go over 5%, I mean, that can be devastating to this country. So that's what you need to watch. And that happened, passed into 5.02, I believe is what it was, if I remember correctly. And boy, the alarm bells were going off. The Secretary Bessent, he recovered admirably. He was very credible on the front lawn while he spun his tail. But the point is, business leaders that really know this stuff knew that was a significant issue. The president made the right decision by backing off. And you can say he blinked, or you can say he saw the danger or followed his advisor's advice. It doesn't matter. But we moved away from that. Now today, the market, the market had probably the next day had its largest increase in modern history. Today it was down around 1,200 points again, the Dow Jones Industrial Average. So it just shows you there's a lot of fluctuation in the market. The 30-year Treasury was heading up north today. It was about 4.8 at one point. So that caught everybody's attention. So there's just a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of turmoil, and business leaders want some certainty. They don't need, they're not looking for guarantees, but before a company's going to build a factory in the United States, he wants to know that the money he's going to invest is not suddenly going to be undervalued because of a whim change in public policy. So, these gyrations are just unsettling the job market. Nobody's going to go into a hiring mode. And the fact that the president halted the reciprocal tariffs led to a market recovery, but the next day reality set in. And that's today. It set in again, and there was big losses. Business leaders are frustrated. And so those of you who are in the job market who are looking for a job, you're frustrated. Well, so are the people that could potentially be hiring you. And this is not political. This is just ebb and flow of business. When these big geopolitical events occur, whether they're man-made or other events occur, it's going to disrupt the job market. And the executive job market is challenging. The recession is still possible, although maybe not as likely as it was if things had stayed the way they were yesterday. So then the question becomes, okay, we're in a tough situation. What can I do? And the first thing you got to ask yourself, are you ready to compete? If you get that chance, are you ready to present the best case scenario for who you are and the value you can bring to the table? Because once that phone rings and they want to do that initial screening interview, you have to hit a home run. You absolutely have to be, really knock the lights out. And so what I would encourage you to do is stop and really take stock of who you are and what you're really good at, and be honest with yourself. This is where the rubber meets the road. And so many people have gotten into the job interview and they think they're really confident and they've always been successful in the past. They have splendid records, and then they're not picked. And part of it is because businesses now, when they hire, they can be very, very selective because there are literally dozens and dozens and dozens, hundreds and hundreds of people applying for jobs, probably the same job you're applying for. So they can be very selective. And that just puts a lot of weight on you to present your best version of who you are. You can't go in and do what you've always done. You have to be clear-eyed about what they're looking for, and then you have to be able to really sell your value. And that's just a real critical issue that we're going to talk about a little bit more in just a minute. So what I have found in all my coaching experience and then interviewing nearly 9,000 people in my search career is we all struggle to see our flaws. Me too. I'm not any different than anybody else. And there's a gap between how we see ourselves and then how other people see us, how potential customers of my firm see me, how employers may see you. And so you have to be really, really honest with yourself. And that's an age-old problem because we struggle to see our flaws. And it's hard, but you got to strip it off. You got to get down to the very nub, as my mother used to say, and come to grips with who you are, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and then be willing to do something about it. Be willing to move from good or very good to elite when it comes to selling your value and really shining in a job interview. We tend to focus. Part of the problem is we like to focus on what we do. So I can't tell you how many times in a job interview when I would ask people, tell me about yourself, and they would start talking about all the stuff they did and how many people they were responsible for and the size of the budget and all that stuff. And it's good stuff. But very, very rarely did they say, and I accomplished this and I improved cash flow by this, and to give me really value-based specifics. Now, be honest, 8-10 years ago, even that was not as an important criteria. People look for where you worked, where you got your degree. Did you is your scope of responsibility and your kind of your skill set, is that what we're looking for? And that kind of became more important. But now they're saying, what have you accomplished? It's akin to the old comparison between the elevator speech and your value brand statement. The elevator speech was all about, this is who I am, this is where I've been. Whereas the value brand statement is, this is what I've accomplished. This is what I can do for you. In our minds, we say ourselves as effective leaders. Nobody that I met that's a CEO or chief operating officer says, "Well, I was really pretty mediocre." No, we all think we are really effective leaders. But in job interviews, it's amazing. We are reluctant to make definitive commitments regarding our performance. I've had several candidates that I coached and people that I met in the course of my career that they were perfect for a job. And in one case, a friend of mine was interviewing with another big national search firm. He had everything they were looking for. This was an organization that had about 4 or 5 critical problems. It was a health system. This guy had dealt with the exact same system or same problems. He had run an organization about the same size, a little bit smaller. He had successfully dealt with those issues. There were some pretty prickly political issues and some medical staff issues. He'd done it. And he was extremely successful. And the only reason he was making a change in his career is he was ready to take the next step up. And this system that he was interviewing with was a little bit bigger. And when he didn't get the job, I said, well, Pat, why not? You had everything they were looking for. Didn't you connect the dots? Well, no, he said. It was all on my resume. I just assumed they would read it and understand. And that was the old way of doing things. And that doesn't work anymore. You have to take the initiative and connect the dots. You have to be able to say, listen, I understand from all the feedback I'm getting from my interviews today that these are the issues, and this is what the recruiter has told me. And let me tell you something. I have dealt with those successfully in the past. I have dealt with these issues successfully in the past. And go through all 4 or 5 issues and talk about how you were successful and what the net benefit was to the organization. You have to sell yourself. And a lot of people don't want to do that. Part of the problem is we were not brought up to brag on ourselves. But in this market, you got to do a little bragging. And there's a right way to do it and there's a wrong way to do it. So, we have to see ourselves as effective leaders, but then we have to prove it to the people that we're talking to about hiring us. And the other thing is, when I said, well, why didn't you make those commitments? He said, well, they might have held me accountable if I got the job. And I kept thinking I thought that was the point. So you have to be more committed today. I tell this story frequently. I met a guy had was doing a search. He came into the search late and he really did not interview well. And so we did not develop him to present to the board. But he was a nice guy. He had all the certifications and he had a great record. His boss retired. The board asked him if he wanted to step up to be the CEO, but he had some family issues and he said it's not a good time. So the board brought in somebody else who then decided he didn't want the former number 2 guy involved, and so he was given his walking papers. He had not interviewed in 10 years and he really was struggling. And he had gone to multiple interviews, and at the end they would say, well, we've really enjoyed getting to know you and we'll get back to you, except they never did. So I volunteered because he was such a nice guy and had a nice family, and he was beginning to feel like he was never going to work again, which is a classic feeling after you've been in the market for a while. And I told him, you've got to close the deal. You've got all these certifications. You've got all this experience. The medical staffs of the places you've been have absolutely loved you. They all respect you. They appreciate the fact that you take them, involve them in the problem solving, and you respect their role. And you're honest and you're straight up. Even when you have to say no, you're honest and straight up forward about it. And but he never talked about that. And finally, he goes to Southwest Colorado to interview, and he and his wife absolutely fall in love with the town. It's just a beautiful little town, and they're just so taken with it. And they say, this is we're supposed to be here. This is where we need to be. So he went through the next morning. He went through all the interviews. His wife stayed at the hotel and drove around town and met people. And they took her to lunch and do all the things that you would do in that kind of particular kind of search involvement, where a hospital CEO comes into a city. He's going to be one of the most important leaders in the community. He's going to be one of the largest employers in the community. So they introduce you around town, and he's busy interviewing with the doctors, and he's busy interviewing with staff members, and he's getting a lot of good information. And at the end, he has dinner with the board, and at that night, and they ask him a lot of questions, and he answers their questions. Okay, he just answers their questions, and in the operative word there, he just answered their questions. And finally, toward the end, they said, well, we really appreciate you coming down to see us, and we'll be happy to reimburse you for your expenses. We're just delighted to get to know you. We will get back to you. He had heard that 10 or 15 times. And he said, John, something just snapped. And he said, I looked at the chair of the board. I said, before I leave, may I share a couple of more things with you? And they said, by all means. And he said, my wife and I are quite taken with this town. It has everything we have been looking for, and it is a place that we would be honored to live. People have been so kind to us. You have good schools. We still have a daughter in school, and so that ticks off that box. He said, the hospital, the health system you have here is really wonderful. I can see a lot of potential, a lot of opportunity for growth, and a lot of opportunity to serve your community more effectively. He said, I know the problems. Everybody's been very candid about the problems you've had. I have dealt with those problems before. I'm really good at those issues, and I have been very, very successful at doing that. If you hire me, I guarantee you that I can help you get through these issues and rebuild the relationship with your physicians and the board, between your employees and the physicians. I've done it before several times. I can do that. And I promise you that if you hire me, that will be something that we will get changed. And they said, well, thank you. There was silence in the room. And then he stood up and he said, I want to thank you for allowing me to make that statement. And he left. The next day, they were driving back to Minnesota, and they stopped at a truck stop in northeast, southwest Colorado up to northeast Colorado. And it was kind of a rainy, cold day. And his wife went in to powder her nose, so to speak, and get snacks and some coffee. And he was standing filling the car with gas at the pump, and his phone rang. And the guy said, Roger, this is so-and-so. I'm the chairman of the board. At so-and-so hospital. And he said, I'm calling to tell you that we took a vote last night and we want to offer you the job. He said, we were so impressed that you were willing to make a commitment, that you were willing to put yourself out and to promise us that you could effectively deal with these issues. And he said, we know they're tough, but the fact that you were willing to do that really changed our minds. And he said, Roger said, I nearly cried. He said, I'd gone through all of this stuff, all those interviews. And I found out that suddenly all I had to do was just tell them that I had the confidence in myself that I could do the work. And he did it in such a way, he wasn't bragging, he wasn't being arrogant. He was a pretty mild guy. I think he was a Lutheran from Minnesota. So you sort of, if you've ever listened to Prairie Home Companion, you kind of know what that means. And he said, you've been fussing at me. And he said, I couldn't take it again. And he made that commitment. You don't have to overwhelm a board with facts and figures and files and all this data, because they're not going to remember any of it. Okay. What you have to do is share your successes with them in a story, how you were able to do that. And he did that beautifully. And he summarized it again in his close. And I kept thinking to myself, when I was involved in selling helicopters to hospitals in the mid 70s, not exactly knowing where I was going. I remember somebody said, now the most important thing you got to do is when you get before the customer, don't forget to ask for the offer. Don't forget to ask for the sale. And he said, and it's the same thing. When you're looking for a job, when you get with the decision maker at the end of the day, tell them, I want this job. I know I can do this for you. And I want to assure you that if you bring me in, I will be the kind of employee that is of value to your organization, that your employees can trust me, your physicians can trust me, or your stakeholders can trust me, your customers can trust me, because I will be to try to do the right thing that's consistent with your values, with your mission, and for what's best for the company. And it's not about me, it's about the good of the company, something like that. And that's important, because employers are hiring, they are hiring certainty. They want performance values. but they also want somebody they can trust and they like. Somebody once said, hiring a new CEO in a small town or in a business, it's like waking up in bed with somebody new in the bed with you. It is kind of like a marriage, and people make mistakes. The number of searches that end in a failure within 18 months is about 40%, and that's horrible. And so we work with our clients to help them understand how to dig in and understand the organization, and then how to match their successes, their skills with the needs of that organization, and how to put it in a narrative that will win confidence with the hiring authority. So I think those two stories. I've always kind of really liked those stories, and if you've been with me in the past, you've heard them maybe once or twice. But I think they're great examples. And the guy in Colorado, he finished. He said, I felt like I was almost getting too emotional, but you know what? They decided they liked him. They decided they trusted him. So you have to be prepared to step up, and you have to be clear and specific about your value. Well, why should you hire me? And use your prior accomplishments, because that's the definition of your value. And you have to be willing to talk about that. And you have to be willing to show them how you can make a difference in their organization. Just answering questions won't work, because there are maybe 30 or 40 other people that they've been talking to. So you have to stand out. You have to be able to get to that finish line before anybody else. And you have to be able to do it in a way that they say, this is a guy or this is a woman we trust. You have to connect your skills, your successes with their needs. And that is a big issue. People think they do that, but they don't. And that's one of the things we work on when we teach people in our master class on job interviewing, how to connect your successes and talk about how it can benefit that organization. And we talk about how to research information and data mine, what those issues are, so that when you get to the final interview with the board or get to the final interview with the hiring manager, you can be very, very specific about how you can help them succeed. And again, I say this all the time because it's two things that trigger the hiring decision: likability and trust. And that's something you have to be doing as kind of the message underlining that this is something that you really want to accomplish. You want to be sure that you make specific commitments regarding your performance. If you're afraid to do that, because gosh, if I say that, man, that might create problems for me, because if I don't live up to it, you're either good enough to be that and good enough to do that job, or you're not. And if you can't live up to the issues they're committing to, then maybe you need to step aside and let somebody else come to the table who will do that. And if you don't think that's fair, it's just the way it is now. And you have to be willing to do that. One of the things I told you have to brag a little bit, and you have to know how to brag correctly. I've got a part of our course called Mastering the Art of the Job Interview, and it's called How to Brag Effectively. Then people say, well, I can't remember all the stuff I've done in the past. And that is a common and a very serious problem. Because if you don't remember your quantifiable successes, then how are you possibly going to differentiate yourself from everybody else that's in the process that's looking to be interviewed? Well, I've been preaching this for years and years and years, and it's called journaling. And people I met who've journaled in their careers, and I was journaling probably 10 years before I met a guy named Moran Stajan, who's owns a leadership consultancy in Dallas. He's a former SMU guy. And I was at an SMU workshop, and he spoke. And he asked how many people kept a diary. And I raised my hand. I was one of 2 or 3 people in the room. And he said, those people understand the value that they get from journaling. And I said, he's right. I really do. And people say, well, what do you do with your journal? Well, let's talk about that, because it is an essential resource to help you do a better job communicating your value. Okay. First of all, it's a way to keep a record of your employment, who you worked for. You may have worked for several people in an organization, who you worked for, what dates you worked for them, what was your salary, and what were your big successes. okay, for that individual. Then you probably had some signature achievements, and when those happen, you journal that. You can even tab index it later so you can reference it at a faster pace at some later date. But you control your significant accomplishments. What was the challenge? How did it happen? What did I have to do? What did I have to learn? What did I have to master? What were the goals for this challenge? How did we do it? And what were the results? And you know what? People say, if you are in an interview and you have to say 2 or 3 times to the recruiter or to the person interviewing you, I don't remember, or I don't know, or let's add third one in there. That was a long time ago. Okay. That's like interviewing a reference who can't speak to your performance. They aren't a good reference. So if you want to be an effective candidate, you have to come loaded. You have to come ready to really talk about your success, saying you're successful, and then showing your success. Man, that's too big. That's a big difference. So you need to be able to show your quantifiable achievements. And if you don't write it down, you'll never, ever remember. So you also want to have, as I said earlier, a record of your supervisors and your colleagues. Your peers are important. So many times we move from a job and we just forget about all the people we work with, even people we kind of liked. Don't do that. Those may be people who, when you need help, can help you. So if you can't stay in touch with everybody you ever met, but in every organization, if you stayed 2 or 3 years, there's 1 or 2 people that you got close to, that you really enjoyed being with them. Keep track of that. Keep their contact information. You may not be able to, because people move around the country now, and with cell phones, those never change. In the old days, it was a little bit of a challenge, but today you can, you remember the names. You say, oh, I always remember that person. No, you won't. There is a correlation between the color of my hair and how much I can retain these days. So I am a big time journaler. I journal all the time. And whether it's notes for my newsletter, notes for these online coaching sessions, but it's really, really important to write stuff down so that when you get ready for an interview, they may have a specific situation. You can go, when I was at this organization, I had to do this, and we were very successful. You go back in your journal, find that, collect the metrics, because that's important. The before and the before and afters, which are powerful ways to tell your story. And here's what we did when we launched this big initiative to improve our cash flow. Here's what our cash flow was before, and here's what it was when we finished. And those are impressive things. Saying I'm really good at turning around cash flow ain't going to cut it anymore. You're going to have to show that you've done it and what the before and after success was. And you won't remember it unless you put it in a journal. Now, your journal may be in a computer. It may be a computerized journal. That's fine. Just be sure it's backed up. I don't have to worry about backing this up. I just have to be sure that my lovely wife, who is constantly after me to throw things away, doesn't throw it away. She knows that when she sees something like this, that's important. And then when I finish that book, I put a sticky label on it, what the dates were, and then I'll go back through and tab certain pages that have information that I might go back to and review later. Don't use the college sort of those spiral notebooks that you took notes on in class, because those are the kinds of things that get thrown away. Get something that you like writing with, that it's comfortable, and that you're going to use. Because if you have a journal and then don't use it, you're wasting time. The other thing I tell people when you're in a job search, one of the big problems are that you're just going to get knocked down, and it's a grind, and it affects your attitude, your spirit, your self-esteem. You can get really, really depressed. And so every day I tell people, write 3 things in your journal every day that you're grateful for. And the guy said, well, what if I run out of stuff that I'm grateful for? And I said, you got a bigger problem than finding a job. But it's a real help. It's been a blessing in my life, and I encourage you strongly to do that. So again, significant events, and write those down, and also move into reflective thinking. Significant events in terms of changes in your career, significant events in terms of your relationships with people in the organization. honors, things that you were asked to do. Those are important things. And then reflective thinking, the observations that you make. Matthew McConaughey, who wrote a great book called Green Lights, is a Texas guy born in Uvalde and grew up in Longview, Texas, about 40 miles east of here. And he wrote the book Green Lights was based on all of his journals for all these years. And he is a big devotee of that daily habit of journaling. And it's a wonderful book. I encourage you to look at it. It's a little bit hard to read because they got really too cute by half in terms of all the ways that they printed his notes, and you can't always read them clearly, but it's a fabulous book and it tells a wonderful story. And it talks about, you can sense his self-reflection about, how his life changed. And he, toward the end in his book, he said, that the things that are important to me are my faith and my family. And, that kind of defines who he is. And when you get down in a rut or you feel like you're really struggling at work, sometimes putting these reflections in your journal can help you get clarity. Now, here's what I mean. Rand Stajan used this example. I don't know him well, met him a couple of times, but I was really impressed. And so let me share this example. Musicians, before a big concert, they practice. They may know the music by heart, but they still practice. They work on the interpretation. They work on, if it's a violinist, the fingering. They just, play through it several times just to get back in the rhythm because they may not have played that piece in a while. Sports figures, they go to batting practice, or they go to the driving range, or they have spring training and they, practice between games. That's important. They work on the game plans for the next team. But what do executives do? Going to the golf course is not going to help us be a better leader. It may help us connect with people. It may make us a better networker, but it doesn't really make us a better leader. What do we do to get practice? Well, let's go to the football stadium. The head coach is on the sideline. Now, if you know anything about football fields, they're slightly pitched in the center so that water will run off to the sidelines. That was back in the day when there was real grass fields. I don't know if there are very many of those left. Even I was in my mom's hometown the other day and passed the high school stadium, and they had one of those expensive artificial turfs like they have in most pro football stadiums. And I kept thinking, wow, we now know what's important in Texas: football and chicken fried steak and cream gravy. So, they are down on the sidelines. And, that's an important position. And the TV camera's always focusing in, especially at a crucial point in the game, that they have to make a big decision. And the camera zooms in on the head coach. And he's standing there with his headphones on. But he doesn't have a real good view. He hasn't been able to really see from a better vantage point why are we not making this block, or why is this play not working? But he's talking to guys up in the press box who are looking down, who have a better perspective. They may not be as experienced a coach as he is, but they have a different perspective and can share with him what they're seeing in terms of opportunities, in terms of mistakes, in terms of what they need to do to make that play successful, this really important play. Then above those coaches on top of the press box are a bunch of guys with a bunch of people with video cameras. And each team videos their whole game so that they can grade the film, review the game film after the game to sort of see who was able to perform well, who made their assignments, and who really struggled, and who's going to need some more help in terms of for the next game. And that's called game filming. Well, what you do with your journal is you're creating a game film. So when you make an important decision, write down your thoughts about, did you have the right people at the table? Did you really understand the problem? Could you have done something better to communicate the mission vision of the project? Talk about the key decision points, how you were able to make inroads and win over stakeholders or convince the board. And keep a record of this. And then at the end of the decision process, when you have been successful, you want to write down your thoughts and think about, what could I have done better? And somebody said, why do you care about that? You were successful. No, being an effective leader is always about getting better. And so I really encourage you to think about journaling and think about reflective observations. And at the core of all these things that will make you a better candidate, make you a better interviewer and a leader, is the journal. And so I really encourage you to consider that. I know we're running a little bit long today. I apologize. I said it was going to be about 30 minutes, but clearly it's not. But I have a 5 o'clock roundtable call, so I will move on quickly now. Here are the takeaways. Executive management job market is not going to significantly improve over the next 12 to 18 months. Now, I know there are people out there that have been looking for a job between 8 and 14 months. And some people who didn't have a network have applied and applied and applied online, which is a terrible way to find a job. But if you don't have a network, you're kind of forced into that battle. There have been people who've reported, not just to me, but other job seekers and other people who write columns about job search, that they have made 200 or 300 applications just to get one or two interviews and then didn't get a job offer. So don't waste your time doing that. If you're an executive or manager and you aren't building a network, then you're really making a huge, huge career limiting mistake. You will be making a career limiting mistake, and it's you lose your job. And we're all going to, in this marketplace now, there's going to be so much change that losing a job is just maybe part and parcel of the transition in the business community. But when you lose a job and you don't have a network and you have to find the job the hard way, it can be so painful. It can be your morale. It can be a bone-crushing morale event. Don't do that to yourself. Start building a network. If you don't know how to do it, I can help you do that. I've been networking most of my life. Now, companies are still laying off, and you're going to see some increases in layoffs. Right now, they're very isolated, targeted, strategic layoffs. But as people get pushed onto the street, including all the government workers, and there are going to be more joining them on the street. And most of the government workers, everybody says, well, that's in Washington. No, 80% of the federal government workers are scattered all over the United States. We like to think of those stupid, lazy bureaucrats in Washington, and that's not the case. And the stupid, lazy bureaucrats is kind of a stupid thing to say, but that's my opinion. And I know some of you may not agree with me, but I've dealt with those people a lot in my career. And so, you're going to have to, there's going to be intense competition. And so you're going to have to elevate your game. It's not going to become easier. What you see today will continue. And if anything, it's going to get more competitive, more challenging. So you absolutely must adapt. I want to thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate you being with us. If you have any questions, you can connect with me at johngself.com and schedule a call or a Zoom meeting. And if you want to review this again, it'll be available on YouTube later this afternoon. I hope you have a great weekend, and we will be off for the next 2 weeks. So we'll be back with you. The next week is Christmas week. We'll be back. We will be with you the following week. So we're going to be off a week. I was hoping to get 2 weeks, but it's only going to be a week. So I want to thank you all very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.